Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole for Thursday, December 14th, 2023. It's 9:34, and I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the SCRD is located within the traditional territories of the Sea and Squamish Nations. First up on our agenda today is adoption of the agenda. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I did want to point out that we've got alternate Director Wynn sitting in today, as Director Stamford is unavailable. So, motion to receive all reports and presentations. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. And with that, we will go straight into Annex A, which is a presentation on the feasibility study for the Garden Bay water treatment improvement.
Thank you, Chair and Board, for letting myself attend. I'll quickly pull up the presentation here. I'm Walt Bayless from HDR Engineering, a professional engineer based in Vancouver, and I have a specialty in water treatment for municipal water systems. And I was retained by the Sunshine Coast Regional District about a year and a half ago to provide an overview assessment of water treatment options for the Garden Bay facility or the North Pender Harbor region. I had done some work at the facility back in 2010 with the upgrade of the UV, so I was reasonably familiar with the facility and its history. The project was intended around looking at how to address seasonal changes that have been coming up in the water quality, which I'll touch on in the presentation. Also looking at some of the challenges with the water and a high-level overview of what can be done to address it, and a little bit of a touch on costs and next steps to go forward into the future. We'll finalize with a Q&A period as necessary. I'm also joined in the audience by one of my colleagues, Miriam Desfoulian, which helped pull this study together over the past year. So very quickly, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the source there, but just for those that might be joining us from remotely or others that aren't as familiar, the Garden Bay water system, or also known as North Pender Harbor, is supplied from Garden Bay, and it is treated to meet the British Columbia guidelines for water quality objectives for microbial requirements for surface water. So we treat it as an unfiltered surface water source. Over the past 5 years plus, the staff had been noting some deterioration in the water quality measured in the source water, and that ranged from 2 key parameters. Turbidity was one that they were constantly monitoring, and that is a measure of the visible clarity of the water. Some people see it as a murky, cloudy type characteristic, and it's related to solids being suspended. The other water quality that they monitor is the what we call organic carbon, and that has to do with you might see that as a teaish color in the water. And then we also reviewed regulations, how the current water quality meets these regulations, and in order to determine some options in the future for the Sunshine Coast Regional District to consider. Quick overview of the area. You'll see on the lower left an aerial image of the highlighting Garden Bay Lake. It is then servicing the north part of the harbor. Presently, there's no connectivity to the South Pender Harbor. It has its own independent water treatment plant. So, and then in the top right, a very high-level distribution system. You'll see the green square on the bottom towards the right-hand side of the image. That's the pump station where water's pulled out of Garden Bay Lake, and then it's pushed up into the elevated Garden Bay Reservoir and ultimately as far as the Daniel Point Reservoir. Hotel Lake is no longer used as one of the sources, and it's worth noting that. I brought this slide for the purpose of trying to provide a context of some of the restrictions in land availability. The site is currently sitting in the Ministry of Transportation right-of-way, and you'll see the blue squares in the area are all privately held land. And it is a consideration as we go forward as to how the land limitations do restrict what we can do for treatment at the site. When we reviewed the water quality, I show up on the left-hand side the British Columbia water treatment objectives, and there are sort of 5 broad categories that the Vancouver Coastal Health looks for. First is virus treatment, which you're fully compliant with. That's through the chlorination that you currently have. They then have Giardia, otherwise sometimes referred to for protozoa treatment. That you also are fully compliant with the UV equipment that you have on site. So bacteriologically, the water is fully treated. You also have the 2 forms of treatment, both chlorine and UV. Seasonally, you're not always complying with the less than 1 NTU. It's a measure of the turbidity. And you're fully compliant with the E. coli treatment as well. So historically, you generally meet that, but on occasion, you don't always meet the turbidity. We also reviewed Health Canada's guidelines, which are published by the federal government. There's 2 that are identified as areas where you want to look for treatment. One is elevated natural organic content, and the other is the color. I'll touch in the presentation a little bit why these matter, and seasonally you go above objectives. These are not, color has a guideline, organic content does not so much have a guideline. It is indirectly related to some of the way chlorine reacts in the water, so it impacts the chlorination that we have to use in order to provide the bacteriological treatment, which is one of the primary objectives of the treatment system. When we reviewed the water quality challenges in the lake, past work by the Sunshine Coast had identified 2 key drivers that are causing this seasonal elevated turbidity. One is natural lake turnover. This occurs seasonally as the water levels in the lake, or the temperature changes through the lake. As the water warms up, its density changes and the lake tends to turn over, and it lifts sediment off the bottom of the lake. The other aspect that's been identified is high winds can actually cause some turbidity to stir up in the lake as well. The natural organic content I mentioned, that's due to just the natural decomposition of leaves. You can think of it as very much like tea steeping in the lake. It causes this light brown color, and it's very naturally occurring material. Both of these are monitored at the existing facility, turbidity continuously, and organic content we can't measure continuously. We can only measure that through a lab, so we use a surrogate measurement called UV transmission, which is continuously monitored at the facility. I'll touch on it as we go along, but we do look at the most common methods for treating both of these water quality challenges, and both of them involve some form of chemical treatment and filtration. Bit of a historic data graph, give you a second to digest it. The light blue circles on the upper half of the page are what we call the UV transmission, which is tied to the left axis, and you'll see it goes from 0 to 100%. This is representing how well light at a very specific wavelength can travel through the water. This is actually a wavelength that you can't see with your eyes. It's outside of the visible light range, but it's very organic material. It absorbs this light, so it gives us a sense of how much organic material is in the water. Levels above 70% are generally quite favorable. When we drop, you'll see there's a few points, and specifically an event in 2019 where you had a drop down into the 50-60% range, which would be considered an event, an elevated organics event. As you can see, majority of the time you're well above 80%, demonstrating, for the most part, a high quality water. The lower graph, purple X's, tied to turbidity, which is on the right-hand axis. And you'll see the bright red line is the guideline level of 1 NTU. And you'll see a seasonal sawtooth pattern in the water quality data where it comes up towards every season, and particularly in the between 2018 and 2019, you'll see a large spike up to 3 NTU. These are still relatively very low numbers, but they are exceeding the 1 NTU target that the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority is looking for. quick overview of organic content, and I provide this photograph of these sample cups on the right-hand side, and you'll see the furthest left is what is essentially a raw water, and you'll see that slight discoloration in the water. The really dark one is actually the reject water from this particular test, and the sample on the far right is the treated water, and you can see that change in color as we remove the organic material from the water. That is when we refer to organic content or color, that's what's driving that, and the best way to visualize that is similar to a cup of steeped tea. The reason this matters to us is the elevated organics react with chlorine during the disinfection process, and it consumes additional chlorine, it removes the chlorine during the distribution process, and it does have some indirect or some byproducts that form out of the process, which are, there are guidelines and recommendations from Health Canada to keep these to a minimum, and at times you are actually exceeding those, so that's why we want to remove this organic material. Another plot that the field staff collect on a regular basis are the data for the two most commonly monitored disinfection byproducts, the HAA and the THM values. You'll see on the upper graph, it's what we call the HAAs, haloacetic acids. There's a guideline level from the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guidelines of 80 micrograms. And you'll see at the Garden Bay plant, they're always below this level. However, by the Daniel Point sampling point, you're above that value. There is a direct correlation to time, how long the water and the chlorine are in contact with each other, and that's why you're seeing it higher at the Daniel Point reservoir sample tap. The lower graph is the other parameter we watch, and it's got 100 microgram per liter level trihalomethanes, and similarly, the Garden Bay site is always below, but by the end of the system, it's starting to get above that guideline level during the sampling. So both of these are an important parameter that we want to bring back down below the guideline levels. We looked at treatment as noted to remove the organic material and the turbidity. We would typically look to a filtration system. The most common methods in British Columbia are sedimentation filtration, and those who may be familiar, that is the technology used in Metro Vancouver at the Seymour facility. A second very common method is called dissolved air flotation, and that is used common here on the coast. The other method is a membrane system, and that's used both down in West Van and also on Ladysmith. The big difference is all of these require a pre-treatment with what we call a coagulant that absorbs the color and helps to consolidate the very fine turbidity into larger particles, which we can remove. The sedimentation is a gravity process where we wait for those, what we call a flock, it's like a snowflake. We wait for it to settle out of the water, and anything that doesn't settle, we remove through a filter. Dissolved air flotation turns that upside down, and instead of waiting for those fine snowflakes to settle, we actually put in just air, which actually lifts them and floats them like carbonated water, lifting the snowflakes up to the top. The reason we do that is when you have water with very little turbidity, there's no weight to settle those snowflakes down, so it's easier to lift them up. Membranes are a very physical method. We don't wait for them to settle, we just pass them through those flocks, those snowflakes, through a very, very tight either plastic or stone membrane to remove those particles physically. Based on the type of water, as I noted, you have very low turbidity, just occasionally bumping up to 2 or 3, and places that, when we say high turbidity, can be hundreds or even thousands of NTUs. So when you're talking 1, 2, 3, you're very low. So dissolved air flotation is very favored for colored water because it's creating a very light flock, snowflake particle. We can lift it up very easily. There's another benefit locally in that you currently within the region have 2 of these facilities, one at Chapman Creek, which is the photo on the top left, and the other one at South Pender Harbor. So there's also a familiarity and a comfort with the technology regionally. Another benefit which has come to play quite recently is the availability and supply chain considerations. One of the advantages of the DAF, dissolved air flotation DAF system, is they're actually made locally, so parts, support, service are readily available in the Lower Mainland. It's a complicated figure. The key message I want to present here is that we have to add quite a lot of equipment to the facility, but we will also retain the existing facility. It's a very functional facility. It does its job very well. The existing facilities in the bottom center, there's the existing high lift pump station. That is the facility you see from the road, and those pumps actually exist below grade, and above them are the existing UV facilities. Those would be retained, and it's important to realize that you're not investing on any buying or replacing any of those assets you've currently bought. The change we would make is we would pull the water from the lake to a smaller pump station. We call it a low lift pump station in the new facility. That will then just, rather than lifting the water all the way up to the Garden Bay Reservoir, only high enough to put it into the treatment system. We would do 2 pre-treatment chemicals, one alkalinity to do 2 things. First, to raise the pH, and second, to allow the coagulation process to function properly. And the coagulant is a chemical we add. It would be consistent to what you use in Seashelt and South Pender. It's typically an aluminum-based product that helps to destabilize and cause the turbidity to come together and also absorb that color out of the water. From there, it passes through what we call the 2 DAF trains. They're composed of flocculation, dissolved air flotation tank, and a sand filter, at which point that treated water flows back to the existing high lift pump station where it's pushed out into your water system via the existing UV and chlorination process. One of the biggest challenges with this particular site is it's highly restricted for land. We have a waste product we generate during this process. It consists of the color and the turbidity removed. We have to deal with that, and given the restrictions, this plant is likely, or we're recommending it would be what we consider a highly efficient facility. So we take the material off the DAF process and the backwash from the filters. That then is actually recycled back into your system at the beginning of the treatment process to be retreated, and it's a small portion, 5 to 10% of the flow, and it actually allows us to have a second pass to further concentrate the solids and recover some of the water that was removed due to the nature of the process. So it allows us to take your treatment plant from about 10% efficient to 10% waste to about 5% waste, and even down as low as 2 or 3% waste. A couple of obvious benefits for that. One being we waste less water. We all know Sunshine Coast is very water conscious. The second benefit is due to the disposal of those solids. We don't have a sewer system and we don't have land available to treat those. The existing options used on the coast are solid storage ponds. Both Chapman and the South Pender Harbor have that. We don't have the land for it. So the recommendation is those solids are sent to what we call a thickener, further concentrates those solids, allows some of that. We basically consider getting even a bit more of the water recovered from it, sending it back into the treatment system to be treated, and then that thickened solids gets trucked off-site. So we're trying to get it down to a volume that minimizes the off-site handling. In terms of footprint, you'll see the blow-up of the existing property. The existing pump house shown on the bottom center of the page, that's where your pumps and your UV and your chlorination are located. There used to be a generator there. We will be adding a new generator as part of this process adjacent to the building. Was the intent, or inside the new building, but I think from timing perspective it would be outside. And the new building we envision consisting of a series of smaller rooms that's for chemical, electrical, mechanical equipment, and then the main treatment area, and you'll see the footprint for the dissolved air flotation equipment there on the drawing, and then a small thickener to the north of it. And then we would just improve the access around the property and tie it into the existing driveway that runs to the north. Now that we've done a feasibility level assessment, there's a lot of work to be done and to move forward with, and the preliminary outline of the next steps. So by that, I mentioned the backup generator that is envisioned for the 2024 year. And given that there wouldn't be a building, it would be located outside at the moment. And then there's also been funding approved it was approved back in the spring, but due to constraints, hasn't been advanced yet. That would include some preliminary work, which includes surveying the site, confirming legal right-of-way evaluations, potentially preliminary archaeological assessments, depending on some of the funding options, potentially advancing the conceptual design. Updating review costing. It could also include some environmental, what we call a phase 1 environmental assessment. Future activities into 2024, 2025 would be the detailed engineering work and ultimately the construction of the facility, which would involve new building, bringing in new pumps, process treatment equipment, and installation of all of this equipment. Typically, that one wants to look for grant funding to support that kind of work, which introduces a timeline challenge when you're trying to wait for the provincial or federal government for funding. At present, that would be the first step, is starting to identify those grants, getting applications in. The other things that can happen while that grant funding process is happening are you can advance with preliminary design. The downside is that any work you do in advance of that grant funding isn't fundable under the grant, so you would assume the whole cost of that. However, it is a percentage of the overall project cost. Typically in the pre-design would be 2 to 3% of the project cost, and full engineering would go after that. There would also, you'd want to enter into land discussions with MOTI about the right-of-way, initiate conversations with the permit agencies, including the Vancouver Coastal Health, who are aware of this project, and flag any environmental concerns, both riparian area setbacks under the Water Act, and also identify to confirm there's no historic use of the land that could cause concern through the environmental assessment, phase 1. As I noted, any work that's done in advance of the grant isn't fundable through the grant if you are successful. High level of permits, fortunately, there's not a huge long list, but it is definitely a MOTI right-of-way, and so they are going to be involved with the land discussions. There would, in order to engage with the First Nations, the archaeological overview assessment would be an important aspect. Environmental, we could advance geotechnical to confirm the soil conditions given the proximity to the lake, the low-lying land. It's important to understand what the nature of those soils look like as we build on top of it. It's likely you'll have to initiate a development permit, which can also take many months. Funding would also have to be confirmed both through grant funding, reserve funding, and sort of refinements of the project budget, and further dialogue and negotiations just to bring the Vancouver Coastal Health along, because they are ultimately one of the key permit issuers for the project. Preliminary cost, I'll touch on that, but first on the right is the photo of the South Pender Harbor plant, which would be very similar to what we'd be envisioning. The base cost estimate for the construction is about $9 million. This includes around $6 million for the treatment facility, $300,000 for a generator, a couple million for contingencies, $900,000 for design service allowance. This equates to high-level numbers between $2 and $3 a cubic meter associated with 100% debt servicing. So if you went to the Municipal Finance Authority, borrowed $9 million on a 20-year amortization, divided by the amount of water that region uses, it's $2 to $3 for debt servicing. So it's a significant, it is the most significant portion of the project, and hence the benefit of grant funding to bring that number down, potentially 3/4 is typically, 2/3 is typically the funding amount. So it would reduce it to about 1/3 of those numbers. Once you have it up and running, there would be an ongoing annual operating cost. We have made some preliminary assumptions as to those costs based on the amount of water you use and chemical dosing, and whether to the extent of full-time labor that's allocated to the project, but that equates to around $1 to $1.50 per cubic meter. The range was even as low as 0.7, but there's a high level of uncertainty there around those numbers as we very preliminary in the process. Appreciate the time and opportunity to present it. I'll turn the floor to the chair and to the board if you have any questions and other items you'd like us to address at this time.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just before I look to directors for questions, there is a staff report accompanying this Annex B. Manager Walkie, I see it is for information. Did you want to speak to that at all before we move on? Okay. All right.
Thanks, Chair. I will say one thing that talks a bit about timelines in the report. Mr. Bayless touched on it, but it's in more detail in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions for information. So the waste product that would be created by this is organics mixed with the coagulant. We are currently doing something with our landfill biocover. I wonder if this particular product would be suitable to be included in the biocover at the landfill.
Thank you. It's difficult to outright say. It's typically blended if it is used on a recovery at a landfill. It doesn't have a lot of, believe it or not, even though it's formed of organic content, it doesn't have a lot of organic value to it in terms of soil. So it's blended as a soil amendment typically because on its own it doesn't generate a lot of great growth. It does actually have some indirect benefits around mobility and nutrients. I'm assuming you'd be using it in a planting type setup rather than a landfill seal. So in terms of a growing medium, the nutrients are just not concentrated enough in the way plants like, but the coagulant actually does restrict certain movements of nutrients and helps trap them. So there is some indirect benefit of restricting nutrient flow, particularly phosphorus, over land.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes. If you didn't have site restrictions, you had more room to play with, how would that change the design of the plant and the cost?
We would go for a more simplistic residual treatment process where we would, what we do at the other two plants, where we allow it to go into an outdoor settling area and just let the solids try to settle over time and ideally dry. It's difficult to do on the coast, so those ponds do have to be fairly large and they take a very long time to dry. So we would go for more passive measures with the settling ponds. However, as I noted, they are challenging in their own right because of the climate.
And then I think the second half of that was, are there any substantial impacts to the cost?
I don't think it would have a huge impact. You're still having to buy equipment, whether you're buying mechanical or digging ponds. You have to invest in that. The biggest change would be your efficiency of your treatment process wouldn't be as high. We wouldn't be pushing for as high as an efficiency, so you'd have more, you might be running around 95% of an efficiency, where you waste 5, but this plant's going to be pushing around 99.
Thank you. Director Wynn.
Thank you, Chair. Also related to the site, is there a benefit to taking the equipment that's in the existing building and consolidating and having it just one building rather than using the UV treatment and the high lift pump system that's in the existing building? So essentially having one building instead of two.
It would increase the project cost because the moving and replacing the high lift pumps is a significant undertaking. They're one of the largest components of the facility. That building also has had reasonable investments and improvements over the past 10 years and is in should be considered in reasonably decent shape. So it would be, there wasn't a significant benefit to replacing it. Would it consolidate it? Yes, it would. It would make the building bigger. You would have to spend that additional money on that larger footprint, and it would reduce your number of assets from 2 to 1 that you'd maintain. Potentially free up a little land on the property, but it was deemed not a huge change to the project cost. It would be definitely something that's probably worth considering as the project advances into further engineering. As this stage, it's very preliminary, high level, and it's a consideration that's probably worth looking at in sort of preliminary and detailed design.
Thank you. Just before I go back to Director Bax, I'm going to look to the area director to see if he's got any questions. Director Lee?
Sure I do, but I was listening. My first question is, are we proposing to build for the future at the same time?
That is correct. We looked at the future build out for the population demand for the North Pender Harbor and looked at the expansion requirements for that. We also provisioned in the building, you may have noticed that we didn't take up all of the space in the room. That's to allow a future third facility, which is beyond the design horizon. But it allows you to, essentially we want to build the buildings for 80 plus years, but the equipment, due to the uncertainty in water use, water demands, we tend to build the equipment for 20 and then you upgrade as you go along. But the building was sized to provide you even the expansion beyond that 20-year horizon.
Manager Walkie?
If I can just add to that, please, Chair, that part of this feasibility study was to consider North Pender Harbor on its own. Not, as noted, there's a budget proposal for 2024 for investigating potentially supplying water to South Pender. That wasn't considered as part of this project.
Thank you. Director Bax?
Yeah, question for Manager Walkie. I find it really interesting that this is about the same price as what we paid for Church Road. And I was wondering if we could make a comparison of the number of people that it's serving as compared to Church Road. I know Church Road provides us with about 25% of our Chapman Lake system water. And the cost per liter there is a known item, a known quantity. I'm just wondering how many people does this facility serve at the averaging $1.25 a cubic meter?
Thank you, Chair. Now you're testing my memory here about how many service connections we have in North Pender Harbor. I can't remember off the top of my head. And I do know Church Road's 50 liters a second. We go by that kind of a number, and I can't remember specifically what we push out of Garden Bay either. It's not 50 liters a second.
GM Rosenboom?
Thank you. I think the big difference is one is groundwater, one is surface water. That's also, if you compare, this is in a way comparable with our South Pender and Chapman treatment plants. And in previous discussions about water supply for the Chapman system, there was talk about, okay, what is the cost of groundwater versus the use of surface water? I think this is, a clear example of how expensive surface water can be. And I think these kind of issues we will see with any surface water source, turbidity, and I think climate change is not helping us there.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jim Rosenboom. If I can add to that, Church Road is adding sodium hypochlorite, which is like liquid bleach, and UV, where, as Mr. Bale has explained, this is quite a process similar to the South Pender treatment plant. And South Pender in the day, I think, was 7 million or 8 million to treat the water out of that lake for South Pender. So it's probably a similar cost to the South Pender process.
Thank you. Might be a question for GM Rosenboom here. This is a process that we have to look at when we're looking at any sort of surface water uses and treatments. Would we be hypothetically looking at a similar sort of process for Grey Creek if we proceed down that as a permanent source in the future?
Thank you. Maybe I can expand on that a little bit. As you know, there are two projects underway also for Egmont and Cove K. And in Egmont, we have the similar issues with too high levels of byproducts because of organics. And Cove K, we're also exploring if that's the case as well. So for both instances, we would have to look at maybe there's also similar kind of investments required there to address those issues. Cove K, Garden Bay could be, yes, but it will totally depend on, usually because it's it's a creek versus stagnant water, the turbidity levels and could be completely different in summer. So it's a creek and not a stagnant water like Garden Bay, Cove K, or Wall Lake for Egmont.
Okay.
So that usually influences the water quality issues.
Thank you. Director Wynne?
Thank you, Chair. A question regarding operating costs and this dissolved air flotation system, commonly used here on the Sunshine Coast and throughout the province. How does the operating cost compare over a long term, 10, 20 years, with the other two types that are commonly used within the province?
Regarding the sedimentation filtration process, you'd be very, very similar. They have the air process that's added is relatively simple. It's basically an air compressor. We compress the air and feed it back in. So you're not adding, no importing chemicals. It's just natural air. So they are very similar. The membrane one tends to have a higher cost because you actually have a membrane consumable. You also have to clean the membranes on a regular basis. So typically depending on the type of membrane you buy, they could be 5 to 15 year life on those, and you have to throw them out, buy new ones, and replace them. Those are largely, you go back to the same vendor, same supplier, you buy them from them as well. So you attempt to lock in long-term costs for those, but it's difficult to lock something in that might be replaced every 15 years. So you tend to have just a depreciating warranty on those, but that is a amortized cost you have to carry in perpetuity if you go to more of a membrane-based system. The DAF process and same as the sedimentation filtration process, most of the equipment is made of stainless steel or aluminum, depending what you can afford. And those have very long lifespans, in excess of 20, 30 years for the steel equipment. And with minor maintenance that's readily available, typically welders can fix that kind of stuff. So they have very long lifespans. So you're not into a renewal cost on a regular basis, which tends to be one of the most expensive aspects of the membrane, is the renewal cost. So they would be a lower technology cost or a lower capital cost and a lower operating cost going forward.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I get that this is expensive. That's trickling through my brain here. And I have some concerns about the expense for a small water system because I take it, if we're looking at a bunch of these water treatment plants, each of them are probably going to be roughly the same cost, but they're being supported by very small numbers of tax-paying households, and this is kind of alarming, frankly. Is there any potential, if the two systems, North and South Pender, were joined, to have one high-level treatment plant rather than two?
Manager Walkie?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's part of phase 2 that we'll have to review, and especially if we have the approval to study the two systems connecting together, because it ties back to even going back to the permits that we can draw water out of each of the lakes and the volumes per year. It goes to things like that. So we currently have an impact on Garden Bay Lake. We drop it. What would be the impact if we dropped it more, if we only supplied from North Pender? Similar as South Pender. So I think there's potential for sharing of water, but I don't know if we can fully supply from That's my gut feeling from one source.
GM Rosenboom?
Thank you for the opportunity. In '08, there was a study completed by Ned Biesholt and that on these systems, and at that time it was different options were assessed, combining the systems, and at that time the decision was made to keep the system separate, and consequently the South Bender system or treatment plant was built as is. So it was assessed at that time, and hence the South Bender treatment plant was only constructed to serve the South Bender system. So as Manager Walkie confirmed, if the budget would go forward, we would look at to see if we can connect the system so that there is a backup and for emergency supply purposes, and to see if there's any other wins possible. But we would also have to look at the fact that there are two different water services area. So we have to look into how do we do that financially and administratively.
Thank you. Director Inkster?
Thank you. I'm glad that a number of directors have mentioned the cost and the subsequent cost per user. And then as Director Rosenblum has mentioned, the additional proposals further north for treatment of water and the costs associated with that. And then the reference back to the original plan probably 15 years ago in order to determine that there be a north and south and the bylaws connected to them. I'm wondering, you always wonder if when those decisions were made and the decisions were made to look at separate plants, if the cost of providing those plants historically has changed so significantly to the tune of double, where then we start to look at these plans and wonder whether per user the cost and the larger cost is sustainable over time, and whether we should be looking at what we can do. I'm glad that Manager Walkie brought up the licensing of the drawdown on the water bodies, because that is another issue. But I just don't know with the challenges we have to the south with water and then having a number of smaller plants, whether it's the cost is sustainable. On the flip side, it's one of the reasons why we look at, I hate to use this comparison, but I'm going to sewage treatment plants. We move to one large plant rather than a number of package plants because of the cost of the individual plants times the numbers of water systems. So it's a big discussion, Chair, about how sustainable this is over time, considering our larger water needs and challenges to the south.
Thank you. Director Lee, you said you had a bunch of questions? Did you want to ask another one? Oh, just a second, Director Lee. GM Rosenboom?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to make one comment regarding the remarks from Director Inkster. North Bender is, of course, their independent water service, independent water system, independent water service. So the participant of that service will need to fund the service. And I think the number of service participants is less than 1,000 taxpaying for the partial tax portion. And user fee is a little bit lower than that. Ackman and Cove K are, of course, part of the regional water system. So those costs would, of course, be shared by everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yeah, the 43,000 for chemicals, that's on top of the chemicals we already purchased then, eh? Or is that a yearly figure for both?
We took that as additional.
And one full-time labor allowance, is that just a guess, or is that on top of what we're already doing with the plant?
Thank you, Chair. That would be, currently for South Pender, for example, we send somebody up there every day to work at the plant. How we work two plants, we'll have to see, but potentially one person could run the two, but quite possibly we'd send two people up. We currently check Garden Bay Pump Station treatment plant as it exists daily right now, but it's more of a go in, monitor, check, and leave, where South Pender, they have to stay there and do processes at the plant.
Thank you. Yeah, my first reaction was like probably one guy to do it most of the time and do both, and then someone helping occasionally. So, but anyways, that's going to be determined once we figure out what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wynne?
Thank you, Chair. So noting the timeline of this project, a number of years, 2026 or 2027, and also the concerns of Vancouver Coastal Health with the current condition. Is there anything that is proposed in the interim to treat the water, to bring it up to an acceptable level that Vancouver Coastal Health would be happy with, or is it live with what the residents have until this new system is online in a few years?
Thank you, Chair. The current process, we work directly with Vancouver Coastal Health now, and they're happy with the process that we're doing. It's just they want us to move forward with addressing the concerns. So when we get near 1.0 NTU, we connect with the health officer, and he asks us to, monitor chlorine residuals more often, more coliform samples, those kind of things. But the process that we're using right now is what we're going to use until we have a treatment process.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. Let me see if I can phrase this well. Are we assessing the long-term sustainability of these water sources in view of increasing droughts? I know that we have existing water licenses, but they were probably based on historical data. So do we have a project in the pipeline to find out if we have enough water for the current population and for the expected build-out of the population?
GM Rosenboom or, yeah.
It's a valid question. When we did look at the feasibility assessment, we did look at the licensing aspect, noting that the long-term sustainability is another aspect, but it was at that point outside of the scope, so it was identified as an item to look towards as part of a need through even the 20-year forecast we looked at. You would bump through those licenses, so that would open up that entire conversation about licensing, sustainability, and source supply.
Okay. Director Lee?
Do we know the capability of Garden Bay to supply raw water? Have we ever had a look at that aspect of it?
I don't think so, other than the capacity of the pumps and the permit maximum allowable that we're allowed to pull out of the lake.
Yeah, I was just curious how much water we could dare take out of the lake, but I don't know how you'd determine that. Is there a way to determine that?
If I may, we would, you'd do a watershed assessment, sort of looking at the seasonal inflows into the lake throughout the year, looking at the amount you can actually fluctuate the water level in the lake, which is tied to both environmental and user considerations. That gives us a storage volume, and we look at that relative to demand curves through the year, adding in long-term forecasts associated. We then tie evaporation, rainfall changes onto that as well, and that feeds into the watershed model. So you effectively do a demand supply analysis on the storage in the lake, and that again is tied to, in your case, largely just rainfall. The most challenging aspect of that is how you define the watershed. It's one thing to look at just on the broadest base, just rainfall within the catchment area, but there's a lot of assumptions that tie to that of lost water, ground infiltration, groundwater seepage. We often sometimes use what's called a surrogate watershed, where we look at a very similar water source that has a similar behavior, which may have data tied to it. So we look at sort of those various parameters. The more robust method is developing a watershed model, which takes time, and it takes collecting data to actually make sure it's calibrated and meaningful. Once we have that, then we can look at the supply-demand analysis.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Sounds expensive, am I correct?
That would be why we like the surrogate method, because it allows us to take a watershed where someone's done the hard work of collecting the water. So first task is typically look at the Water Survey Canada, because they have a number of stream gauges. And if you can characterize your watershed in terms of its area, exposure to rain events, topography, grades, if you can get a similar system where Water Survey Canada has collected a lot of data, it helps to really narrow down that effort to a more tangible assessment, whereas the doing it from the ground up is, as you say, a lot of work, because you've got to get a lot of data and try to validate a lot of assumptions. So that's why I mentioned the surrogate approach, because it's a lower cost approach to try to get to a reasonable assumption.
Yes, it's definitely not necessarily part of this project, of course, but we are building it for future growth. So the question then becomes, is the water there for future growth? I believe, though, that the future growth would fit within our existing license to quite a large extent. I don't believe we're using all of our license yet. Is that correct?
At present, you are not, based on the growth projections and the current water use. You would exceed that before the 20-year horizon, based on the available water licenses, the numbers that we were coming up with. Now, again, we have to make assumptions at this stage around the long-term demand and when growth occurs. So there's obviously variability in that, but it is one of those items that was identified as something to start considering into the future.
Thank you.
So I think the answer was, we're going to be okay for at least 20 years.
You would need to monitor it over that period. If you see rapid growth, it might be before 20 years. If the growth continues at a slower rate, then you would be fine. And also looking towards water management practices as well. They all come into play. So I don't want to say absolutely, but you do have to monitor that. I think we could put it as there's a potential that it could not last the entire 20 years, but there's decisions that would have to, there's actions or decisions that can affect that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
So this last summer, about 70% of BC was in an extreme level of drought, with water courses measuring record lows. So I wonder about the water forecasting, that we're in rapidly changing conditions. And is the province doing any sort of general, well, you may not know this, but like, I'm worried that we'll build a plant and not be able to use it because there won't be enough water. So should we look at the forecast before we start building the plant?
GM Rosenboom?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment here. I think it should be noted that Garden Bay is not a standalone lake. It's connected to other lakes. And we also have licenses for other lakes in the area. So one thing we can look at is, as part of the next phase that still need to be initiated, as just indicated, we can look at to see what our total amount of licenses is, and if we see that there is a risk, given the climate projections, if we more do a kind of risk analysis, risk assessment of, instead of doing a full-blown water model. Do we foresee any issues? If so, then we can do a deeper dive. But that will at least do the analysis at a higher level to confirm if we foresee any issues with water supply from that perspective.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Director Lee, did you have any last questions before we move on?
Nope, I'm pretty comfortable. Thank you. It was a
Thank
great
you.
report.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you to the chair and the directors for letting us speak.
I'd like to propose, it looks like we're all having some internet connectivity issues here, so I'd like to propose we just take 5 minutes and see if they can resolve it in the back end. And welcome back, everybody, to the Committee of the Whole for December 14th. Hopefully, the technology holds out for us. Next up in our agenda, we have Annex C, which is AVICC call for resolutions. I don't think this needs an introduction. We know what this is all about, directors. Are there any topics that directors would like to raise? Director McMahon.
Yes, ports. We had a meeting with 2 cabinet ministers at UBCM on the question of funding for maintaining critical ports, which are transportation hubs. I'm wondering, staff, in my recollection, prepared some material for that meeting, which would potentially form the basis of a resolution. Wondering if staff has enough on that to at least take an initial stab at it.
That's a good question. So you would be asking something akin to that the province provide sustainable ongoing funding for port infrastructure?
Yes, and they also need to decide what ministry deals with ports, because it's fallen between the chairs provincially. And there are some questions around MOTI, because MOTI is responsible for the roads that connect to the wharves, and they also approve developments in water access only communities. So it seems to me that they should have some level of responsibility for the actual ports.
Makes sense. I'll look over to our corporate officer.
Thank you for the question. Just turn my camera on. Yes, so we can take that away and bring back a proposed resolution on that topic.
Thank you. Director Inkster?
Yeah, can I ask a question about that? Lately, we've been talking a lot about docks and ports and things like that and the costs associated with those in those areas that are generally serviced by docks. My question is, the resolution that comes back, does it mean capital? Does it mean upkeep or operations of the dock? Is that what that funding we're looking for? Complete funding for all those pieces? Because there's usually 3. Because you want to upgrade sometimes. Sometimes we're doing lots of climate mitigation now, a lengthening of docks. And also there's the upkeep that comes with saltwater docks, the weather. Saltwater, and then there's the operations, right, of running those docks and the collecting of fees for the use of those docks, which, depending on the size of the docks and the revenue being brought in, can be a sort of a requisite amount based on the collection of fees. Thanks.
Thank you. I think the intention would be capital and maintenance. I don't know that we're so worried about the day-to-day operations, so to speak. Director McMahon?
Yes, I read a report, I think it was prepared by Islands Trust, on port issues, and I am sorry that I cannot call the details to mind, but I seem to remember something about the province setting priorities for key ports that are, the critical access point for particular islands or communities. And that makes a whole lot of sense. Some prioritizing probably needs to be done. And if the province would do the prioritizing, that would be very helpful, because they've got a broader picture of the transportation network across the coast.
Thank you. Director Bax?
Yeah, again, with MOTI, so I would propose that we ask the province to increase the funding to MOTIs so they may better serve rural communities, increase their communications and cooperations with local governments. We seem to be roadblocked every time we try to get something out of MOTI. Right now, we have nobody in our office. They're trying to hire someone, I know, but we've already asked them to give us a second person in the office in Sechelt. But for MOTI to be given the tools to serve our rural communities better.
Okay. I wrote down increased funding for engagement with local governments, but yeah, I think it's local governments all across the province have issues with Modi, not just the rural communities, but Director McMahon.
Yeah, you might even want to specify regional districts because that's where the crunch point is. I'm happy to work with staff on some of this material, by the way, over the break. I have lots on Modi.
Thank you. Director White.
I've got to add, like, we've got a highway running through the town of Gibsons, and we equally share the issues of communications with Modi, these problems. I think municipalities are equally affected by this. Really, when you think about highways running right through both Gibsons and Sechelt, it causes pretty significant problems when we can't have effective communications with Modi.
Yep. And of course, keeping it to the broader local government context is going to elicit greater levels of support from AVICC and UBCM at large. Director Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. With that Modi, I believe one of the things we should be including is increased funding, increased budget for upgrading and replacing rural roads. They don't seem to have any right now. And we're lucky if we get a patch where in fact they should have our roads are old enough now, they should have a program to start replacing so many kilometers a year. And they don't seem to have that program, so I was thinking that should be included in that motion.
I worry about maintenance and engagement getting tied to the same motion. Director McMahon.
I agree with you. I mean, I could make an omnibus motion because I have a list of issues with Modi, including their transparency and accountability for decisions that they make in unincorporated areas. But I think we're better to state a one subject per motion or per recommendation.
Which could just mean that we've got two Modi resolutions that we'd like to put forward. Director Lee?
Yes, I think that means two.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director Gavious.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps to add to Director Lee's resolution proposal, I think we've been talking about widened shoulders on rural roads to increase safety. And I would like to see some action on the part of MOTI. I think SCRD has done some in the past, but really that is MOTI's responsibility. So if that could be part of safety, maintenance, just throw it out there.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Well, since we're brainstorming here, apparently, an increased emphasis on the safety of vulnerable road users would be a separate topic. But right now, Modi pays lip service to that, but they don't do anything about it. They have, and it's been in the news in Vancouver, that basically they like to blame the pedestrian for accidents. And it's bad road design, frankly. That makes the roads around here so lethal. So they need to actually take seriously the, I don't like to call it active transportation so much. I think vulnerable road user is maybe closer to the mark because we're talking about transit users, walkers, cyclists, people in wheelchairs, people pushing baby carriages, you know, the whole gamut.
Thank you. Director White?
Are we off Modi?
Not yet. I think
okay.
what we're going to end up with is I think what we're gonna end up with is Director McMahon with the volunteer to work with staff, and maybe we'll see what comes forward after the break,
I'm all for the Modi resolutions. I just got another one.
for sure. Director Bax, anything else on Modi?
Oh, yeah, how many placekeeper Modi resolutions can we put in? I opened a really nice can of worms. I like it. But what are the deadlines for these things again? January?
January.
Excellent. So we've got
Have to be submitted by the end of January, which means we need to approve them at a board meeting before the end of January.
That's great. So we got some holiday time homework. That's good.
Just for you.
Thank you.
Yep. Director White, Director Lee, Modi?
I'd be careful about the amount of time we have because they have to be formulated and brought forward to us. We don't have a great deal of time, actually.
Yep. Okay. Director White?
Yeah, this is actually Modi related too, but it's not the same. But free student transit. Yeah, expanding it to high school students, and we've got a lot of considerations and materials on that. I think.
There was a resolution last year, the year before, on expanding student transit.
Yeah, I'm bringing this forward from a counselor.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and he doesn't think there was, so if there, I mean, you can always bring forward, and they'll just put it in the block, right, to reaffirm. But is this a concern? With staff not, should we just, I could just get our students to write the resolution if staff doesn't want to.
No, I just, yeah.
I'm looking.
I'll look over to staff here to see, because I'm getting a couple concerned faces, so, yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, for the hesitation there. So just maybe a point of clarification. So fees and rates are not, they're set by the local government and they're retained by the local government. So I guess I'm just looking for a little bit more clarification. Are we looking to the province through their funding of BC Transit to provide compensation to consider that, similar to what they did with children under the age of 12, having free access transportation? Just clarity. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that was the direction that Director White was trying to go there, would be compensation to fund free transit for students.
Just like they did last time.
Yep. Okay. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. So we've got like 15 Modi resolutions here. Director Wynn.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a process-related question here, and it's the table that was provided in the report that details over the last number of years the resolution and how it proceeded through AVICC and then to UBCM. And then there's a column UBCM decision, but is there another table, or can this one be expanded to show what actually came from that? Like, did the province take it and do something with it, or did it just fall into an abyss after UBCM?
Corporate Officer.
Thank you. So typically what'll happen is, and if you go onto the UBCM website, they have a great resolutions database, and you can find all of the historic resolutions on there, and included with that is typically the provincial response to the resolution. But they do often notify the local governments after the conference of some of the responses that we receive, but they're all available on the website now. If you want to go and check, you can enter any of our resolutions and see what the provincial response has been.
Just to clarify, have the 2023 provincial responses been published yet?
No,
Not
I
yet.
don't think we've received this.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Director Inkster.
Chair, I wonder with sort of the levity around the numbers of MOTI resolutions, why, I mean, we can create them because this is certainly a subject line within our agenda, but why wouldn't the board just ask for a meeting with the Transportation Minister at AVICC when we have so many concerns?
We ask for minister meetings all the time. Sometimes we need a bigger advocacy body. So,
Times two? Well, I know we don't like UBCM, but we don't do them, but the government's usually there. It's, I think it's this time, I think they're actually a 5-minute walk away from our conference this time, so.
thank you, Director.
Yeah, just saying, yeah. I'm just
Okay.
saying, like, why don't we do that as a board if we have so many issues?
And we can still do that even
Yeah.
if we submit resolutions.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
fine with both. But it's just a suggestion that we should talk about if
Thank
we
you.
have so many concerns.
Okay. Director Wynn, I see your hand up. That's a leftover? Okay. All right, so we've got ports, we've got a number of topics for MOTI, and we've got the BC Transit compensation for student transit resolution. Is there anything else? Last call. If not, I would look for a motion that the board confirm these topics and resolutions will come back for the January 11th Committee of the Whole. Oh, Corporate Officer?
Thank you, Chair. Staff would just maybe request a bit of clarity around MODI. So I have 3 topics one around maintenance, one around engagement, and one around road design. If we could be specific about the advocacy issue we're trying to address, it helps staff move forward with actually crafting the resolution. Does that cover what the board wishes us to move forward with? And if so, we would request that we put that in the actual resolution in the minutes.
Okay, I think that covers the conversation that we've had. Yeah, so that would be, increased funding for engagement with local government, increased maintenance funding for rural roads, and improved road design for vulnerable users?
Yes.
Okay.
A 3 for.
Okay. Now I'll look for a mover. Moved, seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Director Inkster, I see your hand up. Is that a leftover? Okay. Thank you. Then I'll call the question. This is voting all directors. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Anything else before we move on to the next item in our agenda? If not, we're moving on. So next up, we have Annex D, which is Cooper's Green Park Community Hall Building Procurement for Ongoing Operations. And we're going to turn it over to GM Gagnon to introduce first before we turn it over to additional staff.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Before I turn it over to Mr. Adam to introduce the report, I just wanted to provide a bit of a preamble in terms of background of what brought us to the table. So the board will remember we actually have 3 separate sort of what I call projects that have come out of originally what was the Cooper's Green Community Hall. The first is the hall construction at Connor Park. The second is the question around the ongoing operation of the building that remains at Cooper's Green, the hall that remains there. And the third is around the enhancements and working with the community around the proposed park enhancements at Cooper's Green. So today we are bringing forward a report to talk about the second, which is the future of the hall / building that exists at Cooper's Green. So with that, I will turn it over to, and also this is a particular item that does not have a budget dollar value attached to it. Those other 2 resolutions actually have a budget attached to it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Adam to introduce the report. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Adams?
Thank you, GM Gagnon, and thank you, Chair. Good morning. This report outlines considerations that would inform a public procurement process for the continued operation of the Cooper's Green Hall building. Before initiating this process, staff are requesting the board confirm staff's recommendations or provide direction on the parameters as outlined in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Nice short introduction. Thank you. Directors, any questions? Director McMahon.
I'm generally favorable to the direction proposed. My question is, which should come first, the request for proposals for operations or the building assessment? If I was looking at operating the building, I might kind of want to see the condition of the building before taking it on, so I just wanted to inquire.
GM Kenyon.
Thank you for the question. So at this point in time, there is no direction for any building assessment on Cooper's Green. So what staff is suggesting is that that's it. What direction does the board want to give? So we have a building condition assessment. That was a table desktop exercise that was done several years ago that does give some preliminary information, which is what has informed the information in the report. And what the recommendation from staff is suggesting is that, in fact, the building is taken as is, and any further investigation or any further study that may want to be done in advance of any repairs or investment in the building be done at the expense of whomever is suggesting that they want to operate the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a bit of questions, but I think a lot of them will probably have to wait until the RFP comes out, like the length of the lease and the cost of the lease and all that. So I'm assuming these details will come at a later date. Correct, thank you. I am also curious about having an assessment of the building prior to putting the RFP out. I also, if I were to take on a building, would like to know what I'm getting into. Like I wouldn't want to have like a surprise when I get there. So something that we can talk about today. I have a question about the length of time for the RFP. So how much time will proponents have? I saw that it would probably open Q1 and then it would close Q2. And I'm worried that that might not be enough time for people to put together an application. It's quite a involved process, I would imagine. So is there a deadline for this RFP?
GM Gagnon. Oh, Manager Adams.
Parks Planning and Community Development Coordinator Adams.
Thank you.
So it's a process. It's contemplated to begin with an expression of interest, which should expand that time a little bit. We would use the standard procurement timeframes, but considering also that something could take a bit of time to come in and put together. But first, the first part of the process is contemplated to be just, kind of roughly what you got.
Follow up?
Thank you for that answer. And am I to understand that there will be a request for expression of interest, so people who are interested in leasing the building will come forward, and then there will be a second phase, which will be the request for proposal?
I mean, it depends. That is, yes, in a nutshell. Mm-hmm.
Chair, follow up if I may. Thank you so much. So we need to work with our procurement department to work through the procurement process, which typically is not something that we bring to this table. So what we're trying to do is something that gets a good response and that really gets out to the community. So that is definitely our goal. How we implement that, we still need to work with procurement, and we have requirements under the Trade Acts, et cetera, that we must follow. So we'll be sure to do that. I think the other thing that I just want to take the opportunity, because I heard you were wondering about the lease, the length of the lease and whether that would come back to the table. So the assumption is that we would enter into a lease agreement, and there are also, we have legislation around what we can do around that and the length that we can enter into a lease. So the intent is we can't enter into anything longer than 5 years without moving into a very different process, which is then disposition of land, which we are suggesting we are not doing at this process. But there's, we have 5-year leases with many different organizations that operate SCRD facilities, for example, up in Pender Harbor. So it's not uncommon to enter into a 3+2 and then to renew it on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wynn.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of questions. And first part of the question is that the report seems to be silent on the issue of who's responsible for paying the liability and property insurance, and especially if it's the staff recommend that the building be continued to be owned by the SCRD. So is that the insurance aspect, is that the responsibility of the leasee?
Thank you for the question, Chair, through the Chair. Yeah, generally, yes. The leasee would have insurance requirements, as was previously stated. Up in Pender Harbor are examples of societies that have proper and well thought out insurance for these types of circumstances.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, follow-up?
Yeah, please.
Yep.
Thank you. So the question then, I guess, that comes to mind is, with the SCRD being the risk-averse organization that it is, then is there not a concern that the SCRD owns a building, the responsibility of the maintenance of that building is onto a third party for minor repairs and major and capital? And then the liability then, who does that fall to should something terrible happen and there's an accident? Then whose responsibility is it? If the maintenance is being done by a third party, but the building is owned by the SCRD, then who has that liability?
Thank you. GM Gagnon?
Thank you, through the chair. We will carry insurance as well. So if there's an accident, everybody's going to be noted. So we, as an organization, have to carry the responsible amount of insurance for the circumstance that the lease is set up around. So that's what we would work with our procurement and risk management folks to make sure that that lease has the proper assurances for both the leasee as well as the leaseor. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, I don't think we're inventing the wheel here. I understand there are other leases through recreation, but another example would be the Gibson's Public Library, where we own the building, and the library is responsible for minor routine maintenance. And I believe there has been a considerable process over the years of defining what is minor and what is major. So, I think this ground has been well trodden, and I definitely support the expression of interest. That will take the temperature immediately. If there is no interest, then we don't have to go a lot further, but it also helps the groups that they don't have to do an excessive amount of work in advance of a proposal. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
I think I mostly got my answer, but I'll ask the question a little different. The way the hall is now is that it's aging, and we're not putting more money into it. So that's the general situation. We had a hall in Irvin's Landing that had aged well beyond this one to where it wasn't safe to actually be in it. And a not-for-profit took a lease, and they actually had to pay $50,000 for a 20-year lease, which they collected locally to get the lease for the hall. After they got the lease, they then fundraised to renovate the building so it's useful. And they then rent the building out, collect the money, but they're entirely responsible for the building. The reason I mention that is that that is an arrangement through us as well. The property is leased from the school district to the RD, and then the RD has leased it to the not-for-profit. I believe that's what we're proposing here, and I can see that it does work for that building, so I think we're talking about the same model.
Yeah, thank you. Director Bax?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for preparing this. This is a great service to the community of Half Moon Bay. I believe that it lets a lot of people do what they want to do with this hall, and we can move ahead and build the community hall in Connor Park. I just wanted to express my gratitude to the work that's gone into this, and it looks like a great project going forward.
Thank you, Director Bax. Director Gabias?
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit chicken and egg, like not knowing who will take on the building. Then it's hard to say, like, well, will we want to pitch in to help with capital repairs or something? But I'm wondering, there will likely be grant and aid or other opportunities for, like, say a proponent has a proposal, and part of the proposal is we would like to get this amount of money from the SCRD. Is that possible?
I think it's far too early to say what might come back. Yeah, and I think that'll be part of the process through the expression of interest, is that, yeah, organizations may come forward and none of them are willing to take it on without some assistance, or somebody might be. Yeah, and I think the expression of interest is the sort of first step in gauging that. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that one? Can I answer your question?
You can answer my question.
Go ahead, Director Bax.
I just wanted to point out that the Community Association in Roberts Creek has done a great deal of renovation in their hall, and most of the funds for that have been various grants. Not very many from the SCRD, mostly provincial and federal grants that they've put together. Some from
Community Forest. Yes.
Oh, okay, well, and the community forest, fine. Well, whatever the source of the funding is, that they managed to do a great deal of work in the very recent past. The last couple of years, they've put a new roof on, they've put a new kitchen in, they put a new gender-neutral bathroom in, and the hall is good for another 50 years. It's a rather old building, but now it's good to stand for another another generation or two.
Thank you, Director Bax. Director Inkster, you're the last hand, and then I think I'll go to the area director for a motion.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I think this is a good solution. I like the fact that Director Gabias talked about what will be the ongoing costs of the building and how that have to be part of the ongoing discussion, because it's good community assets, well used, and it's a nice location. Two things that I wonder about is the roof and any exterior accessibility pieces to the building. Who's ever been there has noticed that may be something that's part of the second piece, part of the risk assessment that the regional district may want to be a strong part of and part of the discussion. And Roberts Creek Hall, yeah, the community forest is all over that beautiful building. So, yeah.
Thank you, Director. Director Gabias?
Thank you, Chair. I do have one question that might have to wait to be answered, but there is the main washrooms for the park are in that building. There are porta potties also in the park. So I guess maybe that's something that will have to be contemplated down the line whether or not there will be new washroom facilities at Cooper's Green as part of the park enhancements project. But, you know, like if those washrooms are shared, something to contemplate in the future. But I guess today's not the day.
GM Gagnon?
Thank you. You're right. I don't think we can answer that question today. I think what we're trying to do with this report is provide an even playing field for those that actually want to submit, a proposal on what to do. And then we might get a whole different type of proposal, right? We might get someone wants to run a daycare versus someone wants to run an interpretive center. Those all have all sorts of implications. One of the reasons that we want to launch this before we actually get into the park enhancements is so we actually kind of understand. If the group that is the successful proponent comes in and wants to run that building independent from the park without any interface with the park, then washrooms will need to be a consideration of the park enhancement or not. That'll be a public decision, but these all sort of is a bit of a domino effect. But it will really depend on what comes in, and what we're trying to do with the report, again, is say, at a very high level, here is what you can expect when you submit your report. And so that everybody is at least playing apples to apples. Part of the background information we'll provide them is what information we do have, any past reports that can inform the proposal that they submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wynne?
Thank you, Chair. So I've heard a number of concerns shared by directors here as to the existing condition of the building. And I think that that's very valid. I think back to Grantham's Hall and an assessment that was done on that SCRD-owned building, which caused the immediate closure of that building until it was rehabilitated. And so I think that the fact that this building is 40 years old, that its condition was last assessed in 2017, and it was already at that point pointed out that the roof was in need of repair, there was an electrical panel problem, there was many other things, and the cost of that repair at that time was estimated at $144,000 with another additional $100,000 over a period of 10 years. But that was all based on some report, cosmetic, in 2017. So the fact that the SCRD would maintain ownership and the liabilities associated with that, it all brings me to the conclusion that perhaps the moving forward with this procurement process for operation is premature. That pending a physical condition assessment of the building, then and understanding what that condition is, and then moving forward. So I have written down here a direction and a motion that might be considered if there's a seconder for it, but I'll leave that to the chair when you might want to hear that motion.
I'll go to Director White first, and then, Director White.
I was, so I don't get a vote on this, but I get to speak on it. So we have leased buildings in the town of Gibsons, and these relationships go great. You lease them to the nonprofits who, what I'm hearing from staff, this is like a really, really viable and practical way to make best use of public property in our communities. And as Director Bax has been mentioning, it works great in Roberts Creek with that hall run by a community association, and they're eligible for grants. I was also around during the very, very difficult times that Director Wynne had with Grantham's Hall, former Director Wynne especially. But I see it as kind of the reverse situation that we actually want to we can actually be avoiding here, where that was a situation where the community association there was not able to or willing to continue on with looking after that hall, and it ended up with the SCRD to have to do it. This is the complete opposite. So I see this as a solution to pass this on to hopefully a local society that's quite motivated and willing to take on the needed renovations and maintenance of this building for their community benefit. And if that doesn't happen, presumably, if that procurement process isn't successful, presumably it does come back on us, and then we're going to have to go down the route that alternate director Wynne is discussing. But I think the recommendation from staff here is completely timely, and it's hopefully what the community is looking for too.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, I'd like to add a little bit to what Director White was mentioning. The hall I was referring to was not a necessary for the community because there was already 2 existing halls in Pender Harbor. It was actually a benefit to a small group of people that were very attached to it and willing to put the work in to make it work. They didn't start with anything other than start from here and go forward, which is what we're talking about here. And so that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Director Gabias?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think at this point, I'm happy with the recommendations that staff has put forward. I think the expression of interest will be a good first step, and I think we can always, revisit, I guess, at a later date, but I think we need to get this process started. I think the community is ready, and I'm happy to put forward the recommendations listed on page 36.
Thank you, and I've got seconders for that. Any other discussion on the motion? This is, as Director White pointed out, rural directors only. And I don't see any other hands, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Director Wynne opposed. Motion's carried. Okay, thank you very much. Did you want your vote recorded, Director Wynne?
Yeah, please.
Okay, yes. Okay, next up, and thank you to our parks staff. Next up, we're moving on to Annex E, pages 39 to 49 in our agenda package. BC Timber Sales, license TA 0521. And we'll turn this over to staff for a brief introduction.
So the staff report provides information on BC Timber Sales License TA 0521, blocks GO43, B42P, and P8 in electoral area D, Roberts Creek, as a result of a board resolution from April 2023. These blocks were previously referred to the SCRD in the 2020 to 2024 operations plan, in which the SCRD expressed concerns about the cumulative impacts of logging activity and noted that no impacts on SCRD assets or services would come. So since the SCRD's previous review, BCTS commissioned a couple water assessments in the area that resulted in recommendations to reduce the harvest area from 22.8 hectares to 13 hectares. BCTS has stated it will follow the recommendations in the watershed assessments. No SCRD services or assets appear to be directly affected by the cut blocks. However, the SCRD remains concerned about the cumulative impacts of resource activity, including forestry, that is proposed around Mount Elphinstone. This concern has been shared with BCTS in recent operation plan referral responses, and staff are happy to answer any questions you have.
Director Bax.
Thank you, Planner Whitman. And I'm glad that you've expressed the staff's worry about the activities on the lower slopes of Mount Elphinstone. In March this year, I brought forward a motion for the board to consider that was put in abeyance at that time. And I'd like to speak a little bit on the reasoning behind that motion. There was a time when people moved to Roberts Creek for logging, and that time is past. It's no longer the case. There's in 1983 we had a rather traumatic event in Roberts Creek. I sent the board. Sorry, Director Wynne, I didn't include you, but I sent the board some historical documents about that event that was a washout that was quite damaging due to logging above Joe Road and destroyed a lot of properties. There was a big washout. Currently there's over 27,000 names on a petition against this cut block, and I see that that BC Timber Sales has scaled back their proposal by quite a bit. I think it's because they see the writing on the wall that this is not an acceptable activity this close to our community, and although they've scaled it back quite a bit, I still believe that it shouldn't be allowed at all. I think there's other blocks further up the mountain that are that give us a little bit of a buffer, and I understand that logging is an activity that's necessary, but this particular block is troublesome. And when I look at the motion that I brought forward in March, I'd like to make an amendment to the first paragraph of the motion. I'd like to delete in the second line the word for, F-O-U-R, and I would like to delete the rest of the first paragraph from the word until concerns to the end. So it would read that the board of the Sunshine Coast Regional District send a letter to BC Timber Sales and to the BC Ministry of Forests asking to remove the proposed cut blocks referred to as TA 0521 on Mount Elphinstone from the BC Timber Sales operating plan. And the rest of the motion I would leave as it is.
Thank you, Director Bax. Because this was a motion that was held in abeyance, it is currently on the floor. And so with that, I'll look for a seconder for the amendment to the motion. That's seconded. Thank you. Is there any questions or discussion from directors, either to the amendment or to the larger issue? I think this is the first time I've experienced a motion in abeyance coming back. So this is a little bit of a different process for us. But yeah, Director Lee.
Just a little clarity. And it says that we request them to undertake hydrological studies. I thought they'd done that already. Am I incorrect in that?
I believe that has been completed.
BC Timber Sales has completed three-phase watershed assessment on Mount Elphinstone South, and we have those reports. And they also just recently completed the Roberts Creek and Stevens Creek watershed assessments. We didn't have them at the time of this motion.
Director Bax?
So am I to believe that the second paragraph has already been taken care of? Has the hydrological study of this area been done and the report is available?
GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Staff are just conferring. Yes, hydrological studies have been completed for this area since the time that this motion was introduced. Staff are just conferring on the scope of that and whether things like groundwater were included. Yeah, from staff's perspective, there's no problem reiterating the need for a study, even if portions of it have been completed.
And that was gonna be the point I was gonna make, was it doesn't hurt to leave it in because it may capture points that were missed as part of the original study. So, Director Lee, I see your hand up again, or is it a leftover? Okay. Okay. Director Bax.
Yeah, we're talking about some of the groundwater license holders. It's my understanding that there's about 40 groundwater license holders in this area that could be affected.
Why don't I get you to hold that question for a moment and we'll vote on the amendment first and then we'll expand the conversation.
Thank you, Chair Toth.
Thank you. So this is voting all directors. All those in favor of the amendment? And opposed? Oh, Director Inkster, you have a quizzical look on your face.
Well, you moved quickly. Can I just ask a question then? So just to be clear on the amendment, because it wasn't repeated again, we're moving from abeyance to completely taking this cut block out of the consideration.
No, the motion that's on page 39 of the agenda package is on the floor.
Yeah.
Director Bax moved an amendment to this motion, because this was written some months ago, to strike the word for, F-O-U-R, and to end the first paragraph at operating plan. So that's the amendment that I'm calling the question on right now. Is just amending the motion that's here. Is that clear?
Same thing. Just out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so I'll try that again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call the question on the amendment, voting all directors. All those in favor? And any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, the amendment is carried. Okay, Director Bax, you had a question about the number of potentially impacted.
It's my understanding that there's approximately 40 license holders of surface water that rely on the creeks that are within these cut blocks. And so I would, this is one of the myriad reasons to bring forward this motion. I've got a long list of reasons why this motion should pass, and there's a very short list of reasons why it should not. So I would ask that we vote in favor of this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Bax. Any other question or discussion from directors? Director Wynn.
Thank you. I just caught up here on where the original motion was. So could you just go over those amendments for me just one more time, please?
So the amendment that's passed for the first paragraph on page 39 now reads that the Board of the Sunshine Coast Regional District send a letter to BC Timber Sales, BCTS, and the Ministry of Forests asking to remove the proposed cut blocks referred to as TA 0521 on Mount Elphinstone from the BCTS operating plan, period. That's the first paragraph. Everything else remains the same. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind us all that many properties in Roberts Creek, in fact, I think all the properties in Roberts Creek above the highway are on wells. They are not on regional water, so. Or surface water, right. I don't know what the situation with Area D is. In Area E, a number of the people who are using wells or surface water do not, in fact, have them registered, which is really unfortunate because then they don't have to be considered by BC Timber Sales when they undertake hydrogeological studies.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding is that water sources for domestic use only are not required to be licensed at this time. So you're right, there are people that are gonna get missed as part of this. Follow?
The water, all the wells are required to be registered, but they don't have to have a license if it's for domestic use only.
Yeah. One more. I do have somebody on the speakers list ahead of you. Director White.
I'm just trying to grapple with this being a regional issue and where it's like what function this is in. Wait, this is like I'm trying to get my head around it. Like
You're wondering why you get to vote on it?
Yeah, yeah. I
Thank you.
and it affects how I think about it. Like, is this
Thank
a
you.
electoral area land use issue or what?
Corporate officer?
Thank you for the question. This comes under regional planning, so that would include all directors.
Director Bax?
Yeah, I'd like to point out some of this report. On page 43, we see some points that were put together by staff about although the SCRD does not hold water licenses, there are several private water licenses. Although there are no parks in the watershed, there are community-maintained hiking and mountain trails that could be adversely impacted by this activity. And according to the OCP, my OCP in Roberts Creek, which I have a letter, you should have all received the letters from my OCPC in your reading material in support of this motion. And we in Roberts Creek live there because we want to be in nature and we don't want to be living in industrial activity like this. And so there's a groundswell within my community of opposition to this particular cut block.
Thank you. Director Wynn?
Thank you, Chair. And I understand then that that if these cut blocks are removed, then BC Timber Sales will have to find other places to maintain their annual allowable cut. And where that might be, don't know. Maybe Director Bax knows, I don't know. But anyway, because of the amendment to the motion that you've now put forward here, that as alternate, I didn't have an opportunity to speak to Director Stanford about this ahead of time, so I will have to abstain from voting and leave it to the director at some point to make her views known on it.
Corporate officer?
Thank you, Chair. So under regional district voting rules, abstentions are not something, if you're at the table while we're debating and discussing and a vote is held, your vote will be counted in the affirmative. So in order to abstain, you have to physically leave the board table.
Thank you. Just seeking some clarity here on the timing, because I wonder if there is time for us to defer this motion to a meeting when the regular director is back.
You're terrible.
I know I am. Director Inkster, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of, I don't even know whose cut block this is. BC Timbers, it's not sold yet. Was it originally somebody else's? Like,
This is part of the BCTS work area.
We don't stop it now. It gets sold.
it was never part of a cut.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I think the SCRD has been fairly consistent in raising our concerns about logging on the steep and very wet slopes of Mount Elphinstone above the community where we already have chronic stormwater problems. So I can support this motion, and I think it's an issue with regional implications.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question on the amended motion that's currently on the floor. All those in favor? And opposed? You can't abstain. Would you like me to recall the vote and you can go refill your coffee, or?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, by all means, I will recall the vote.
If there's cookies in there, you can bring them back for us.
So we'll try that again. All those in favor? And opposed? Directors White and Lee opposed. Did you want your votes recorded? Yes, to both? Thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, so that is the end of BC Timber Sales, Annex E. In our agenda package, we do have Water Supply Advisory Committee meeting minutes of November 6th, 2023, Annex F. Directors were, lots of discussion, no recommendations. Was there anything directors wanted to?
Order. Shall I?
No.
No?
Okay, I don't see any hands up for Annex F. So with that, we're gonna move to Annex G. Is there any?
Deck minutes?
This is PTAC minutes for, what's the date of that meeting? October 24th, 2023. Again, there's no recommendations for us, but directors, were there any questions based on what's in front of us? If not, moving on to Annex H, Gibsons and District Fire Protection Commission meeting minutes of November 27th. Any questions or discussion on what's here? Director White.
I'm sorry. Could we go back to the previous one? I did a manual hand.
My apologies, I didn't see it. So, yep, that's fine.
I see there was looked like a rich discussion about how advisory committees work, really, at the beginning of this meeting in terms of putting forward recommendations to the board. And yeah, and I think that's helpful and something we should be considering in the context of how these advisory committees can be helpful to us. I've now been on this board for over a year, and I can't recall having considered a recommendation from any of our advisory committees, and frankly, I'm not really sure if the system's working, if we're not getting actual recommendations and advice from our advisory committees and considering them and discussing them. So, and unfortunately, that discussion clearly happened at this meeting, but then I see there were no recommendations coming to us from this particular meeting, and I'm curious if the context of this conversation was that there were recommendations from WASAC that came to the board that we unfortunately neglected to discuss or just kind of didn't see in the minutes. I don't know if anybody would know if that's why this discussion happened, or, yeah.
We had a number of directors attend. Who is the actual representative to WASAC? Director McMahon, I heard you volunteer first. Did you want to provide some context into the discussion that they had?
Yes. So there was a previous WASAC committee, and they did make quite a few recommendations. This is the new version of WASAC, which has only been going for about a year. I have found in general with the advisory committees that they could probably use frequent refreshers on the process, because the committee will get into a considerable discussion that doesn't get really covered by the minutes. And then often there isn't a clear recommendation coming out of the discussion. And that, so some refreshers there, and for the chair particularly, might be very helpful in helping the committees to formulate recommendations that they can take to the board. Or I don't know if there's a way for committees to provide background information, because some of them have some expertise in areas. I really, on PTAC particularly, have enjoyed the discussions about the commercial handling of waste on the coast. And it's provided a lot of valuable background, which does not necessarily make it into the minutes. So that's as far as I wanted to go. Director Lee was there as well.
Director Lee, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, I've been trying to find my hand. This last meeting was a little bit different in that it was an in-person meeting, but we thought it wasn't. And so we attended via Zoom, which made it quite awkward for us. We have talked about it at BOSAC that if you want the board to consider something, you have to put a recommendation forward. A lot of that depends on the chair, though, and as the chair gets more experienced, they will call for recommendations and guide it. So I think in the future it will be more of that. It was a very healthy discussion, though, with a lot of relevant points, but I don't really think they were ready for a recommendation yet. But on the other side, to address Director White's comments, I found that at my own official community plan meetings, they would talk about things and put them in the discussion thinking we were going to action them. And I had to point out that you need to make recommendations that we can pull out and put forward. So they've been doing more of that. And so I think perhaps as the liaison, we will work on that one at the next meeting here. I think that's important to note for everybody. That is liaisons.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's something we'll have to definitely pay attention to and work on with all the committees that we have and oversee. Because you're right, Director White, there are a lot of them that just some discussion, but there's no actions that we as a board should be working on. Director Bax, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to back that up and say that that's a wonderful point of language that we need to impress upon these committees, that they need to create recommendations, and that way that'll be the pipeline to the board. And I'm also wanted to talk about how the APCs have many canceled meetings, and I cringe every time I see a canceled committee meeting because these groups of volunteers are people that I feel that if we don't use them, we're under the threat of losing them. That there are things that we can. I'm not saying that we just give them busy work, but there are things that we can give them that would be part of their expertise. And I know that I'd like our APCs to be looking at our OCPs and seeing what it is that we're working towards a mandated OCP amendments to bring them all together. And I think it's a great opportunity for our APCs to do some of the preliminary work on that. As community members, they have, anyway, that's my input.
Into WASAC minutes, thank you. Director Wynn, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Also related to APC is often case the whatever the topic is and the issue is, there'll be a report that'll come from planning to the APC with some recommendations for consideration by the APC. And then recommendations come out of that APC and come back to through the minutes to the board. But is there not a similar process for WASAC and PTAC and all the other acronyms of committees, where recommendations may come from staff for consideration by those other committees? It seems to work with the APC.
Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is the process. So maybe it's something we need to go over as reminders too, because we, in my understanding, we have put that out in our orientation materials, but the only way that the advisory committees can feed into the board decision-making process is to actually make recommendations for the board to consider in that process. Everything else in the minutes is really just narrative and context for those recommendations. So definitely their effectiveness would be improved by crafting and putting forward those recommendations that take the debate one step further to actually give the board some input to consider.
Thank you. GM Rosenboom.
Thank you. I would like to highlight a difference between the role of an APC versus WASAC. APC is part of a review of an APC, is part of a process of approval by the board. Something is referred to APC and it goes back. So there is actually staff recommendation. It's going to APC. WASAC, that's not the case. The board has always the opportunity to refer something to WASAC. So that is something that the previous board with the previous WASAC did frequently. They made referrals on the subject. They referred to WASAC because they wanted their recommendation. So that's also a way of seeking recommendations and seeking direction or advice from WASAC. It's not staff current practice. Usually WASAC invites staff to provide information on a certain item, or staff is proposing a certain item to be discussed at WASAC. But it's not part of the process like an APC where there is just an ongoing flow of recommendations through WASAC to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, it is a little different. It might help if staff provided questions that they would like the committee to consider, because that would, I think, help focus the discussion a little, especially when there's a very large report that the committee is looking at and they're kind of struggling to digest it. Another thing that the committee does do is provide feedback on communications materials, particularly around solid waste. Last term, I remember that. And I mean, it's a great first step, because if the committee doesn't understand the communications, you can pretty much guarantee that the public isn't going to. So I've noticed the committee making some good recommendations on how to fine-tune the communications. I will say that WASAC was kind of struggling to understand the volumetric billing material, and it is complicated. I was struggling to understand it when we got the staff report. So it's going to be an ongoing process to help communicate the subtleties of volumetric billing and the complexities of it in the public. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I think that was important conversation. Thank you, Director White, for flagging that, for sure. I don't see any hands up about remaining items of the agenda. Annex H, I didn't quite give people the chance to run out the clock on that item. So if there's anything in Annex H, the Gibsons and District Fire Protection Commission, that needs discussion. Otherwise, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from our gallery? Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you at the next one.